Welcome back to this channel, and in this video tutorial I will be discussing some interview questions that are 20 in number and they are related with the AS400. So let's discuss those questions which may or might be asked in interviews. So let me start with the first question. How SFLSIZ and SFLPAG keyword differs with all three types of subfiles. So basically I'll be discussing questions and its answers here. So let me write down the answer for this. So first of all, we know that we have SFLSIZ and SFLPAG keyword in the subfile. So SFLSIZ defines the number of records which would be loaded in the subfile overall, but SFLPAG defines number of records which would be displayed on a page, or which would be shown to the user on a single screen, and then once user take page down or page up, it will display another SFL page number of records till SFL size. So for example, here there are three types of subfile. So first one is load all, second is expandable, and the third one is single page. So load all, in this case SFL page is less than SFL size, and for this one also SFL page is less than SFL size, and for this one SFL page equals to SFL size. So it depends upon the screen size as well, and the SFL size max value would be SFL size is 9999 in both the cases, for load all and expandable. So in these two cases we can see the scenario is same, but why they are even distinguished. So load all and expandable is in itself is different from each other. So in load all subfile we load a SFL page number of record, and then once we press page down, then we again load the next SFL page number of records. So basically we are clearing the previous records which were loaded. So in this case, if we press page up, then again the previous records which were loaded would be loaded to the subfile. So means here in load all subfile we are basically clearing the previous buffer, but in expandable subfile we are loading the first set of records. First set of means SFL page number of records, and then we are again, once we press page down, we are again loading the next SFL page number of records which is less than SFL size. Okay, so in this case we are not clearing the previous buffer, so we are accumulating the size of the subfile. So here the subfile started growing or expanding, so that's why it is called as expandable subfile. So this is the difference between load all and expandable subfile. And in case of single page subfile we always have the SFL page equals to SFL size. So in this case we can load any number of records, but in case of load all and expandable we cannot load more than 9999 records, because their max size for the SFL size is 9999, which is their limitation, but this limitation is overcome by the single page subfile. So in case if we are going to load more than this number of record 9999, then we must use single page subfile in that case. So depending upon the situation or the need, we would be using these three types of subfiles in our system, or we are going to create them. So in this way, these subfiles are differ. So the answer to the first question has been explained by me, and I think it would be clear to all of my viewers who are watching this video. Now just come to the second question. How to identify whether any job is interactive or batch in CL, in RPG and normally. So let's start normally. So in AS400 systems we have command work active job. So let's write that and press enter. Now we can see type here, and under that type column we have different values: SBS, ASJ, SBS. So SBS is subsystem job. So here once I would see BCH, that is batch job, and INT, that is interactive job. So this let me know that this is an interactive job, and BCH status tells me that this is a batch job. So basically if I'm gonna identify what are batch jobs and what are interactive jobs, so the status type with BCH is a batch job, and type with INT is an interactive job. So normally I'm using work active job command, and we'll look for type column, BCH is batch job, and INT is interactive job. So in CL, how I can identify this? So we have a command retrieve job A. So just write that and take F4. So here you are looking for the type parameter. So just take F4 here or F1 here. So you can see a character value of 0 indicates the job is running as a batch, and a 1 indicates an interactive job. So you are going to use retrieve job A command in your CL program, and you will look for the value of type parameter. If it's 0, just take F1 here. If it's 0, it indicates that the job is a batch job. If it's 1, it's an interactive job. So use retrieve job A command, look for type parameter, value 0 means a batch job, and value 1 means an interactive job. In RPG now, so we have a API called QUSR job I, which we can use in our RPG program, and there is a field in that API QUSJT04. So that will contain a value either B for batch job and I for interactive job. So this way I can identify whether a job is interactive or batch, either from a CL program or from an RPG program or normally. Even we can call this API in our CL program as well. But the easiest way is to use this command, retrieve job A. How will the third question is, how will I explicitly open a file in RPG program? So we know we define the file in fspecs in RPG program. So when we define the file and we start reading, so we need to use the opcode like setll or something like that, or then we use the read opcode basically to read an file in RPG program. But once that program gets executed, those files are opened. Once we read them, we are able to read them. But here, how I can explicitly open a file means the file must be closed when the program gets filed or executed. So in fspecs, during file definition, we would be using user open. Let me show you some example. Let me search for disk. So just look for this one. So in keyword section, just take F1 here. So you can see USR open. Specify this keyword to indicate that an implicit open should not be done. This file must be explicitly opened with the open operation opcode. So I need to use USR open here, and at the time of read, I would be first using open opcode to open this file, open then the file name. So this way I would be able to explicitly open a file in RPG program using the open opcode. Now let's move to the next question. Question 4. How do you set pointer to some value or its next higher value? So we have an opcode which is setGT, set greater than value in RPG, which we can use to set a pointer to some value or its next value or its higher value, just as we use the setll. How can we execute a job in AS400? So we have a command submit job, SBM job in AS400, which we can use to submit or fire a job. So we are done with 5 questions now. Let's move to the next question. How can we translate values from lower to upper in RPG and embedded SQL in RPG? So basically we have this %xLateBIF, which we can use in our RPG program to translate lower cases values characters to the upper cases, or we can use upper function in embedded SQL in SQL RPGLE to translate lower cases to the upper. So these are the two ways to translate lower to the upper in RPG or in embedded SQL RPG. How can we write and read a value using DSPF in CL program? So we have send receive f command in CL to perform this. So we can read and write the values to a DSPF using this command, send receive f command in CL. Let's move to the next question, how to check end of file in CL. So there is a mon message CPF0864 which we can check for while reading a file and while using receive f to read a file in CL program, and then use CPF0864 to check if end of file has been reached or not. So just use this mon message ID this to check for end of file in the CL. Can you update a database file in CL? Answer would be no. We cannot update insert records database files in CL. How do you monitor the mon message in CL? So basically we are going to use mon message and then message ID. For example, CPF0000. This one is a generic one, and then we can use the specific message IDs as per our need. So just for example, to check end of file, we would be using CPF0864 here. What is CA and CF? What is CA and CF and difference between them? So CA is command attention and CF is command function. Command attention, CF is command function. So basically CA and CF differs from each other. So whenever we want to pass or some data from one screen to the another in display file, whenever we have written some RPG code and we are navigating from one display file screen to the another, and we want some data to pass from one screen to the other so that we could perform some function there. For example, I am passing some ID from one screen to another screen, and I am showing that ID as well as other additional details which I am gonna fetching from the file to show that on the another screen with including that ID as well. So we need CF at that time, command function. So command function will pass the values of the display file variables from one screen to the another, but command attention do not pass that. So basically we are using command attention keys whenever we want that our program would end or our screen would back. For example, for F12, for F3 case we press F3 to exit, we press F12 to back. So in that cases we can use command attention, or in case we want F6 to add or something like update, insert or anything else, we would be using CF. So whenever we are passing some data from one screen to another, we would be using CF command function key. So whenever we are pressing that key, for example, I'm pressing F6, F6, I would be using CF06. So whenever I am using CA06, I would not be able to pass that data from one screen to the another. So this is the use of what this is CA and CF, and this is the difference between them. So what we can done from OSPEX in RPG? So the first thing which came into our mind is report design. Yes, we can design a report using OSPECs in RPG. OSPECs is basically program described printer file. We can define a program described printer file. Even we can define an external printer file as well. But here we can perform various operations using that OSPECs. So the first thing is the report design, and the second thing is to insert records in a file. So these two operations we can perform using the OSPECs in RPG. What is PSSR in RPG or in AS400? So this is a subroutine. This is an exception subroutine which would get fired in case of any error occurred in the program. So if our program is executing and any error occurred, and if we have coded this one, so we don't need to call this subroutine. It would automatically get fired in case of any error occurred. And in case if we have handled that error in the PSSR routine, that would perform with respect to that error handling, or otherwise if we have done the generic handling, that would perform to that generic, that would behave as the generic one. So this is a error handling subroutine, handling system subroutine called when any error occurs during program execution. Now let's move on to the 14th question. So why we use star INLR set to on? So we know that we are explicitly setting the INLR as on. So why we are doing that? Even we can use the return only. So we are doing this because we want that the memory which we are using, or the memory which that program is using, gets freed. So memory gets freed means all the variables which are used in that program, or the parameters which are passed to that program, or whatever the parameters which are passed as input or the output, gets cleared. They gets blank or 0 as per their data type. So this is the use of the INLR set to on. Free memory all the variables and parameters becomes blank. So let's move on to the 15th question. What we call the program variable used with embedded SQL. So what is this? Basically what I'm talking about is I'm using a program variable. For example, I defined an standalone variable in my RPG program of character type, and I use that with the SQL. Just select whatever field from file into, select this into this from file, that where some conditions, so that into, and then colon, then variable. So this one I'm calling this one colon var1. So this is basically called host variable. So what we call the program variable used with embedded SQL. So those variables are called as the host variables, which are used with the embedded SQLs. So now let's move to the 16th question. How to find the dependent of a file in AS400. So we have a command DSPDBR, and then space then file name. So once we perform this from the command line or from the CL, we can identify the dependent files of a PF in AS400. So let's move on to the 17th question. So what is the length of the variable in DCL var and var1 type star char? So in this case you can see I didn't provided or didn't define the length of this variable var1, but I defined the type of that variable. So how would you tell me that what is this length of this variable var1 in that CL program? So the answer would be 32. So the default length for a variable would be 32 in CL program for a character type variable. And the same question is this one, 18th one, but here the data type is star decimal. So for this one I would be saying the default length would be 15,5 decimal. Now the 19th question is, what is the disadvantage of a global variable in AS400? So the answer is very simple. If we are going to use an global variable in AS400, so basically I'm accessing that global variable from various procedures. So this concept came in ILE, basically ILE RPG, where we are having some various procedures which we are calling from our program, or which we are defining in our program. So procedures have their own local variables, and we have a global variable which can be accessed from all the procedures which we are defining in our program or service program. So basically these global variables are accessed anywhere, so we don't know that whosoever or which procedure is basically you can say updating that or changing that global variable, because that is accessed from anywhere in the program or from any procedure in the program, but the local variables would not be accessed outside that procedure. So the local variable scope is inside that procedure, but the scope of a global variable in the whole program or in the whole service program. So disadvantage is who is changing the value. Don't know, or hard to identify, you can say. Now the last question is, how can we avoid using indicators in RPG? So in earlier time we are using the indicators with RPG program. So for example, if we are reading a file, we are setting some variables to on if the records found. So in those cases as well we are using the concept of indicator. But how can I avoid that? So we have different BIFs like percentile found. So in place of that checking that variable is on or off, we can use the percentile found BIF, percentile end of file, not percentile end of file, etc. There are many more BIFs which we can use, so I'm mentioning some of them here. So we can use these BIFs in place of those indicators, or using that indicator concept, so we can avoid that and use them. So these are the 20 questions which I covered in this video, and I explained each of the questions with their answers and why. I also explained the reason. I also given the explanation of all the questions and their answers. So I think this video would be or will be very useful to all of you. Interview question and answers related to AS400. So that's all in this video. Thank you and have a nice time.